Lego just recently revealed a big project, which is the Lego Smart Brick or Lego Smart Play. They're using them sort of interchangeably, I feel, or at least the community is. And this project has been all over Lego social media and YouTube, anything with Lego content creators. Everybody's been discussing it. So I figured I would put in my 2 cents. I'm Nicole. My opinion doesn't matter, but I'm going to share it anyway. So I just wanted to share my opinion on things that I like about this concept and things that I don't like, and specifically things I don't like, I suppose, in regards to Star Wars, since that is the first IP they are launching this smart brick idea on. And first thing that I like is this trailer. I think it's really cool. It's very intriguing. Even if you're not a smarty pants, you can kind of figure out what's going on. I like the translucence. I'm a big translucent person, so I like anything that's see-through. So this trailer's got me hooked. Anyway, I think it's pretty cool, and finding out that they were doing it with Lego Star Wars was sort of interesting. So the way that it seems like it works, for those of you who may be living under a rock and do not know, it is comprised of three smart components, I guess I would say. We have the minifigure, which allows the smart brick to interact with it. I guess there's like certain phrases stored inside the minifigures and maybe certain like action sounds. And then we have action tiles, and you can clip those things onto like ships, and it basically like tells the smart brick how to interact. And all of the information seems to be stored on the smart brick. There was a little bit of concern that these things would take batteries that you'd have to like change yourself, just like the old 2005, popping open the Lego Star Wars light up lightsaber minifigures and changing the batteries. That is not the case. It does seem as though the smart brick itself holds the battery, and there is a wireless charger, which is a super crazy idea for a Lego item, but I really like it. Overall, I think that's actually kind of cool. Everything else seems to be latent, so there's not really an inherent charge in the other items. The smart brick just reads the information, and it's probably fancier than that. Maybe NFC, I don't know. There's all kinds of scientific stuff that goes along with it, I'm sure. All in all, I feel like this smart brick is actually a fantastic idea. I think that there's a lot of potential with this design, I suppose. I can really see it in something like a Lego City set where they do some sort of like zoo or jungle adventure, and you can have the smart brick telling animal facts. You can have it making animal sounds. They advertise on the commercial that it's can do other things, but really they've only opened with Star Wars. And I understand why they did that, just because the Star Wars IP is huge and it sells really well. So even if it struggles to get off the ground, it will make sales because it's Star Wars. And so it was kind of a safe bet versus going with something simpler like Lego's own IP. It can be a lot less expensive that way, but I'm not really sure it would take off as well. So I feel like a smart brick would do better in other licenses or with just Lego's own ideas versus, Star Wars has potential, but I don't know. I see negatives and positives to it. I can see something like a smart brick being in like a Bluey house for the Bluey Lego line. And I say that because that's something that I would potentially purchase for my son because he loves Bluey and he really wants the Bluey house. And if it made the fun sounds of the kids and stuff, I can see that being enjoyable. And so hopefully, I'm sure we'll see it expanded throughout other things. I don't really know about other licenses. It'll probably take a while, but Star Wars was their heavy hitter. And so I'm not surprised they started there, but I really would have liked to see them open up with more than just Star Wars, if that makes sense. Like, as a mom, I think it's a fantastic idea. As a consumer, though, it's really expensive. Like, I wouldn't personally buy my son any of the Star Wars sets, even though he is only 3 and he does like Star Wars. It's just something that it's not enough bang for my buck just looking at the sets themselves and knowing that, Lego sets come apart and having to try to set it up for him, partly because he's younger. But I think that there's a little bit of flaw with it being in Star Wars because that IP is already so overpriced. On top of this smart brick technology, it's just astronomical. We're looking at some sets that are like $160, and I really don't know what parents are going to be paying for their children to have a set like that. Like, you can get multiple other sets or bigger sets for the same price. And so I feel like that's going to be sort of a hinge pin. Don't get me wrong, the smart brick is a great idea. I'm sure it's been field tested and surveyed, and they're really proud of this technology. And I think they should be because it can add so much more to play. I mean, some people were like, oh, well, imaginative play is dead now, blah, blah, blah. Why does Lego have to go do smart things? But we saw in the Lego Mario line this sort of success with electronics. And I think that, obviously it can't connect to the internet. You can't do anything weird. You don't have to have a phone app. This is still imaginative play. You just have sound bites. It's nothing crazy. I mean, 90s toy technology was full of stuff like this, just maybe not as intuitive. But, everybody back then played just fine. It's still imaginative play. And so I'm not going to harp on that side, like the technology side. I feel like isn't advanced enough. Like it's a non-issue. And just going into the Star Wars sets themselves, just sort of my perspective on them is that there's, again, some good and some bad. I'll say, again, with the price, with them being so expensive, I kind of wonder, and I'm sure that they thought of it, obviously, because we have this system in Mario where you have a starter set and you get it's more expensive and you get the main component to interactive play, and then all the other sets are just basically add-on sets. I'm not really sure why they didn't do something like this with the Smart Brick. They could have had a couple of different starter sets and then, offer the other ones for a cheaper price, because every single set is going to include that Smart Brick and that charger. I understand that you'll need to change up the minifigures and the tiles, but other than that, I feel like that would bring the cost down a little bit. Another thing to say is that we have these 3 sets that have come out, and we have an X-Wing and a whole bunch of tiny little fodder builds, and then we have a TIE Fighter and a couple of fodder builds. And really, I think they should have just taken away the fodder, added the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter together, because we've seen that be successful with, the Rebuild the Galaxy set was really cool. Make it just a little bit more expensive, and then you have 2 ships. I feel like that is a little bit more worth paying for. Like, parents might get behind the idea of like, oh yeah, it's an X-Wing and a TIE Fighter. And then the final set, which is like $160, that one is complete. But again, you have something kind of random like an A-Wing. And that's just sort of my critique, more seeing it, I guess, as a collector. That being said, some of the little fodder builds that they have put in there are kind of cool. Like, for example, the X-Wing, you can roll the cart over and fill up the X-Wing with fuel, and it'll make fuel sounds. I think that's really fun. You look at the sets, and they're just, especially the X-Wing. The X-Wing to me looks real bad. The cockpit is just very strange because they've had to design a space for the Smart Brick and R2-D2 because he's the one that's making the noise. But again, it's really fun if you're swooshing it. Like, I can absolutely get behind the fun idea and aspect behind it. I mean, obviously, they are not trying to go for the most accurate builds in the world. They're not even trying for that. And kids probably won't care that it's not completely accurate. It looks good enough. I think the TIE Fighter looks pretty good. The Return of the Jedi duel is fine. It's very minimal compared to some of the other playsets we've gotten, but obviously because they're spending so much money on the Smart Brick, and it is a little awkward the way, I mean, it's set up similar to what we've seen in the past, but it's kind of awkward having the bricks on the backs of the minifigures versus, like the 2005 Mustafar duel was a little bit more seamless in my opinion, though a lot less pieces, much, much cheaper. So those are kind of some qualities that I don't like, and some things that I do like. There's absolutely a fun aspect to it. It would be interesting to see a Smart Brick integrated into Lego Harry Potter. I feel like something like that can be more seamless just because of the way that the buildings are made. You can probably do more seamless Smart Bricks and minifigures that way. Of course, people are complaining about the minifigures because they have to have the symbol on the back so and I just don't think that there's a way to get around it other than potentially offering capes for some of their minifigures to help disguise that. But you definitely don't want to be digging through your minifigures trying to figure out which one is the smart one because it doesn't have a symbol. Maybe they could have made it smaller perhaps, but again, they're looking at kids being able to use these and kids being able to pull out the right bricks. I will say also, I'm kind of curious to see how the little smart tags work. I believe they work the same as the minifigures, but I would be curious to see how easy they are to manipulate. I feel like as a child, you may get confused on where you're supposed to put the tile and the Smart Brick to make it interact. Like, how are the Lego instructions going to explain that when Lego instructions inherently don't have words? And will you have to keep going back to the instructions to remember how to use these tiles, And so it'll be interesting to see. I think that we're only probably going to see 3 Smart Brick sets this year for Star Wars, and they may integrate it elsewhere. It'll just be really interesting. I kind of want to pick up the TIE Fighter again just to explore it for myself and let my son try it, but I'm not going to be purchasing all of them. And I just don't foresee these being successful in the Star Wars IP per se. and it'll be interesting to see really what happens long term. I mean, I feel like the Mario sets are really winding down. Light bricks were a good idea. We still see those implemented. I'm pretty sure Lego has done sound bricks before, but those aren't used anymore. So only time will tell if this is something that's going to end up falling to the wayside. But I do know that Lego has invested a huge amount of money into this technology, and I think that it's absolutely a really good possible win. We'll just have to see how the Lego company handles dealing with the price. And ultimately, the consumer is going to be the one to, answer that call with their, their money. And everything is just so expensive these days. Really, it comes down to your marketing to the kids so the kids can tell their parents. But when the parents go to look at these sets, they have to be convinced that they're worth buying. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to is Lego going to be able to convince the parents that this is a worthy buy over, let's say, another set or another couple of sets? So only time will tell. I think there's no real good way to judge it right now, but I absolutely do not join in on the massive hate of this concept. Though I would be curious to see how the price slots for Lego Star Wars now work when they've taken up 3 expensive price slots. Are those the children's price slots now? Are they going to make any more like 4+ sets that little kids can enjoy, or is the kids section already full of these expensive sets? And if not, then have these expensive sets taken the place of expensive sets that us as collectors can enjoy, or medium-sized kids with like a nice play set? And so it'll be interesting to see what gets unveiled this year, and kind of, I guess, where we will be shorted due to the smart brick sets. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I hope you enjoyed this sort of conglomeration of thought about the smart brick. These things have just been bouncing around in my head now for a few days, and I didn't write anything down, so I'm talking off the top of my head. But nonetheless, I hope that this maybe brings something new to the table to think about. I don't know. I've not watched too many commentaries on the smart brick, but if you have something that you'd like to add, please feel free to add it to the comments below, and I'll be sure to read it. And I appreciate the viewership, and thanks for sticking around to the end. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.